So this is another example of when we thought we would develop some material and then we found there's already material there which is very good. Uh, we've used the CHEPSA module on this and edited it a little bit, but I thought we've borrowed enough from them to actually warrant putting up their title slide and acknowledging them. So these are the 4 key steps in doing health policy and systems research. In a sense, the first one is the one we've already sort of getting there, almost done, identifying the focus and the question. And now we are going to, in the next 2 intensive days, design the study, although of course it's a preliminary design. You can of course make further modifications after you go back, but the idea is to get a good handle, a good grip on the design and what are the potential designs. Use the opportunity the next 2 days to use the community over here to get a good grip on your design. And then while actually doing the research, you need to ensure these things. So we won't, obviously we've touched on strategies for improving quality and rigor and ethics, but that's something that comes through the actual conduct of the study. So we will at this stage stop at the process of study design, but design of course is a crucial component. So it's design is concerned with turning research questions into projects. So it deals primarily with the aims, purposes, intentions and plans within the practical constraints of location, time, money and availability of staff. This is why we've insisted on having a financial plan in your design, because it's not that we all have the freedom to design exactly what we want and then conduct it. We do need to think about the feasibility and the logistics, and sometimes we may modify our design based on the feasibility. This is a good point actually. So this is where the individuality of the researcher is crucial. So yes, we are driven by the question, but we are also driven by the individual inclinations of the researcher. And HPSR, like a lot of other research, is a creative discipline. The art is as important as the science. So how we frame the question, how we design the study, what do we bring that, some people, you read a study and you can say, okay, this is the person behind it. You know automatically because that person has a style. So that's the individuality, the creativity that design represents. It's very much about style, the researcher's own preference and ideas, whether innovative or solidly traditional, and the stylistic preferences of those who pay for the work and have to live with the finished result. Okay, so that's also there. So sometimes the design can be influenced by the people who are supporting the research, and sometimes the design can be influenced by those who are going to consume the research. And we've already been through that. We don't see these things as separate. It's part of the same continuum. Research getting commissioned, being conducted, being utilized, knowledge creation, knowledge utilization being part of the same cycle. So what can we make up sort of a pictorial representation of design? And the next slide has this pictorial. So it's a broad kind of, not sure about the use of the word sampling, maybe everybody would not agree, but broadly speaking, sampling and methods. Qualitative researchers like to use the word selection rather than sampling. So sampling implies that there is some sort of inanimate object that you are putting into a test tube, whereas selection is more about how you select the people to become participants of your study. Okay, so research design. So we know that we identify a purpose, a question, a topic area, and that contributes to your question. In addition, theory may also contribute to your question. So maybe a theoretical basis for why you evolve a particular question. Okay. So design. So design comes after the question. It must be appropriate to the issues being investigated, to the questions you want to answer, and to the underlying purpose. That's very simply illustrated by this example. Say your question is to explore how somebody understands a reform. You want to understand how people experience and understand a reform over a period of time. And there is no point in using a structured questionnaire, first of all, because a structured questionnaire cannot give you the depth required to understand how people understand reality. You need to engage with in-depth qualitative interviews, in-depth interviews. And the other thing is, don't do it at one time only, because obviously it doesn't address the longitudinality. If you have a longitudinal question, don't use a static study design. It's just that simple. So that's just an example of how your design should match your question. Yeah, so just be mindful of that. It's not rocket science, it's just common sense. Now let's start thinking about what types of designs you can have. So again, this is why we don't emphasize the approach now at this phase. Now you had your vision of all those different lenses. Now put them aside and come back to how you think about design. And design can draw from different lenses and approaches, but it doesn't have to be married to any of them. Okay. So how do you think about design? Fixed designs, flexible designs, mixed method designs. Just ignore the bottom part for now. Let's just think about what are fixed strategies versus flexible strategies. A fixed design calls for tight pre-specification before you reach the main data collection stage. So before you started collecting data, you have planned exactly what you're going to do, right? And most dominant research in public health is done with fixed study designs. A flexible design involves during data collection. What does that mean? Can you have a flexible design? Can you change your design during data collection? Action research. A lot of not just action, even realist approaches change their design halfway through. You can add components. The idea is that the question is answered, not that you adhere to the design. See the analogy here between conformance and performance. We discussed this as an example. The idea is not that you conform to a protocol. The idea is that you get the answer that you're looking for, and you need to do everything you can, and you may need to change your strategy based on what's coming up. Implementation research can also use flexible designs. Policy analysis can also use flexible design. So this is how a fixed design looks like if you envision it. Steps. You proceed stepwise and go up towards your resolution of your study. And this is what a flexible design looks like. And this is something you've already seen in a couple of instances. Not exactly the same, but something resembling this. You've seen it in PAR. You've seen it in realist. Constant cycles of reflection, action, revision. To the extent to which you do this is the issue. And again, I'm just highlighting, these are polarities. You know, we put flexible at one end and fixed at the other end. So when you are now thinking about your questions, how ready are we to deal with not knowing? How ready are we to deal with uncertainty? That at some point, the question won't change. The question is usually fixed, but the design may change. We may want to introduce a new thing into our, new element into our design because of something we've observed on an interim basis. Are we prepared to do that or not? That is a question you need to ask yourself. And it's fine if you're not, and it's fine if you are. Another description, fixed, carefully pre-planned. Fixed designs typically focus on things like variables, defined properties of persons, things, groups, situations that can be measured and compared. Data are often numerical, but you can also collect qualitative data. But in flexible designs, you know, it's the other way. Data are often non-numerical. You're really actually looking more at getting that sort of understanding a situation, achieving depth. But you can also collect numerical data. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. Okay, so in a flexible design, you don't start with so much pre-planning, but rather you start with an idea or a problem and let the thinking about causality, about relationships, about explanations, let that emerge. It's an evolving design, and there are no predetermined variables. These are examples of types of research studies which use fixed methods. These are types of research studies which use flexible methods. So impact evaluation, pragmatic RCTs, cross-sectional surveys, discrete choice experiments, longitudinal analysis. Then flexible designs, these are examples. Process evaluation, case studies, longitudinal case studies, qualitative cross-sectional designs, such as the one I mentioned, where you may qualitative cross-sectional means you want to achieve breadth as well as depth. Ethnographies, histories, action research, mixed method design. Deliberately combines elements of fixed and flexible design to expand the scope and deepen the insights from the studies. You may mix your design to either to expand the scope or to deepen the insight. So if it's something very fixed, you want more depth, you bring in a flexible element to add depth. If something is quite flexible, you want more breadth, you add a fixed element which will give you a more of a cross-sectional understanding. It's not a free-for-all. There should be a meaning behind this. There should be some significance behind this. It's a combination of how you do your selection, how you do your data collection analysis, but it doesn't combine basic, it's not a paradigmatic change. You're not changing the entire way you think. Does that make sense? Can you say at the same time that I'm trying to understand what makes you tick and why you are doing this, I'm trying to empathize, and at the same time I'm also trying to evaluate you for impact. Okay, so mixed method design, again coming back to that, it's not a free-for-all. It's not a mixing of paradigms, but it's a mixing of techniques. There are many benefits of mixed methods. This balance between depth and breadth, what you can achieve through depth, you can't achieve through a breadth-based study, and vice versa. So it allows you to triangulate. So triangulate not in the simple sense of verifying the facts, but to really to look at a problem from different angles and make sure that there is consistency. So what you are achieving from a qualitative element, you should also be achieving something that is consistent with that if you do a cross-sectional survey or if you collect secondary data. And if it's not consistent, then it allows you to investigate why it's not consistent. Okay, so these are your examples of types of questions and what are the types of designs that might be appropriate for them. These are examples. So your normative question, does X work? These are the kinds of fixed study design, maybe a quasi-experimental study, an adapted RCT or a case control study, before and after study. Exploratory, what categories of information are used in decision making? What are the social processes including power relations influencing actors' understanding, experiencing and shaping impacts of interventions? Now, these are the kind of questions you might ask if you're trying to understand decentralization from the perspectives of the different actors who are involved. You use these types of approaches. You can use a cross-sectional type of approach, but it has its limitations. You may want to combine some cross-sectional with a more of a flexible design. You might want to take case studies, might want to do qualitative interviews. Descriptive. So descriptive is a little different from exploratory. Descriptive, you really want to understand in a more flat way what is going on. You want, facts. What is the quality of care? What is the level of motivation? What are the stakeholder positions? Yeah. This is more aptly addressed through cross-sectional surveys. You get a very clear breadth of understanding about a particular situation. But you can also do this in a more in-depth way using qualitative interviews. How do managers influence facility performance? Multi-level modeling though, but this is a positivist take on explanation. So modeling is an approach in which you numerically establish relationships. You create a model of how something can succeed in a system. So this type of thing can this sort of study design for an explanatory study, but with a more positivist focus. How to manage and influence facility performance. On the other hand, you may also have flexible designs for explanatory type of questions. So if you use, to answer a similar question though, you could also use more flexible methods, multiple case studies. So try and understand how this operates differently in different settings. So from a realist or relativist perspective, could use ethnographies, histories, theory-based evaluations. And then of course you have your emancipatory type of design in which you are actually engaged in some sort of change, either as in the Freirean context of mobilizing marginalized groups or communities, or in the context of action research as a person who is mandated to bring about change, such as a program manager could do action research. So, or you are as a policymaker, you introduce an intervention, which then you, at the same time, you also research it. And you can use various forms such as action research and different implementation research models. So, exploratory and descriptive studies are those that typically answer the what questions. Who, what, where, how many, how much, so that's very descriptive. Qualitative cross-sectional surveys, case studies, secondary analysis, including longitudinal analysis of studies. The why and how questions are addressed through evaluative and explanatory types of designs. So case studies, surveys, cross-sectional studies. And then you have your prospective kind of questions. The what if? Suppose we did this, what would happen? And those are either experimental or multivariate models, or like Rakhal just described, panels. Right? So these are the different kinds of ways in which you might start your question. If it starts with a what or a why or a how, and you can think about the type of method that you can use for that. Okay, so moving on to this idea about using theory and the importance of conceptual frameworks. So what is the place of theory? So theory, just by the very nature of the word, sounds heavy. Theory, I'll have to read all kinds of abstract things about, and not grounded in reality, or that very important people have written about these things. But that's why I think in HPSR it's very important to make theory into a slave and not a master. Use your theory when it becomes useful, when it can have a useful purpose, but don't be bogged down by theory. And even when you say theory-driven evaluation, it doesn't mean that you are dictated by theory, you are just driven by theory. Because theories can be useful in explaining why things happen. Using theory in HPSR. HPSR addresses complex phenomena. Theory should play an important role within all HPSR. Now, how can theory play an important role? First of all, it gives you a way of developing conceptual frameworks. Yeah. So what are conceptual frameworks? Conceptual frameworks either help you to design your studies, or they help you to explain your findings, or they can help with both, sometimes at the same time. The other way you can use theory is in theory-driven evaluation, as we've just discussed. That you see if the mechanisms, the phenomena that are emerging resonate with some particular theory that is already known. And it can be a social theory, it can be a policy theory, it can be any form of theory in the mid-range. Or you actually do theoretical research, which is you do conceptual work. Say, for example, you do research on methods, on the application of a method, or on refining a particular method. Different disciplines have different tools and often utilize theory differently. So this is from Robson. What is a theory? A theory is a grand explanation of what's going on in a situation or a phenomenon. A theory can explain why an answer is predicted. It can hypothesize. And theories can mean everything from grand theories to speculative theories. Yeah, so there's a range of different types of theories. What is a conceptual framework? It's a diagram which summarizes your theories. What it does is a conceptual framework can propose an explanation. It can propose that A leads to B, but it doesn't have to do that. What it probably more usefully does in HPSR is it identifies the relevant elements of what you're studying. Okay, so we've got several different elements of what we are researching. Yeah. So what will a conceptual framework do? It helps me to organize my thoughts, and it helps me to develop a design which will address all the elements and also answer the question. So integration of leprosy services and general health services. Yeah. And where does the management come in? So how does integration help in the management of persons? Okay, so then it's really about treatment or management. So this is really part of the same thing. So how does integration, so already you need to establish a link. This is what you're trying to find out, right? How does intervention influence management, right? And the context is leprosy services, general health services. So you're already moving towards a conceptual framework. Yeah. This is what you want to study. Integration influences management. Yeah. And the context is the general health services and how they integrate with leprosy services. So you already have a conceptual framework now, and it's visually mapped. So now whenever you want, when you start designing your study, you can go back to a conceptual framework. And now this is a how question. So it doesn't assume a particular causal relationship. It doesn't say that integration has led to, let's understand how integration has led to better management or worse management. It is just asking how. But if it was asking a question like that has integration affected clinical case management negatively, then you would have something like, you would explain this in a different way. Like you might say, just put a minus over there and say that it's decreasing the quality of management. So it just helps you to tie in. It's just a diagram, a physical representation, a pictorial representation of your overall intention, and that can get more complex. So the idea is all the different elements in your question, try and put them down as a visual, and try and link them in a way that helps you to design your study. So that's one very basic way in which theory. So you're creating a sort of a theory here. You're creating a hypothesis, and this can be based on some known theories as well. So suppose it is well known that integration initially decreases the quality of performance of a system, and then after a while increases it. Suppose you find a theory that says this, and you want to use that to explain, then you may build that in as well. I'm not saying that you will. I'm not even saying that there is any such theory. But suppose you do find that there is such a theory, then you can build it into your conceptual framework as well. So conceptual frameworks can help in investigating causality, and particularly important for complex causality. Why are they important for complex causality? Because there are multiple elements involved, and it helps you to link all of them together. Yeah, and you can show that physically. Okay, so I'm just going to close here. So just keep this in mind. There's no gold standards, non-hierarchical approach to study design. Research design follows these three things. So keep these three things in mind when designing a study. What is the purpose? What is the question you are asking? And where do you stand as a researcher? And HPSR makes use of theory and conceptual frameworks, but doesn't get bogged down by them. Yeah, conceptual frameworks should help you. Theories only if they help you.